Welcome to this final session in the economy strand. Taking the pip, who can reform welfare? I'm Rob Lyons. I'm the convener of the Academy of Ideas Forum. I've been hanging around like a bad smell in this room all day. This is, as I said, the final session in this strand. Lots of commentators are worried about the ballooning cost of welfare and the impact that has on the economy, both in terms of the money, in terms of government spending, but also the impact it has on individuals and the workforce. Earlier this year, there was fury, for example, about the Motability scheme and how much was being spent on that. A fleet of cars that apparently is worth £14 billion. Yet doing something about welfare has not proved to be easy. The government suffered serious embarrassment earlier this year when its attempts to rein in personal independence payments had to be hurriedly scaled back in the face of a backbench revolt. So what is to be done? Are politicians prepared to have the difficult conversations from reducing working age entitlements to increasing the retirement age? Is the debate unnecessarily gloomy about the UK's ability to afford welfare in the future? Is it a moral issue, or will we face an abrupt financial reckoning if nothing is done? And to discuss these points, starting on my immediate left, we have Jean-André Prager, who is Senior Fellow at Policy Exchange, and earlier this year he co-authored the report For Whose Benefit? Proposals to reform health and disability benefits and to create a new social contract. Previously, he was the Prime Minister's Special Advisor in the Downing Street Policy Unit for Rishi Sunak from 2022 to 2024, covering both the Department for Work and Pensions and the Department for Culture, Media and Sport. Then on my immediately right is Lisa McKenzie. She is a working class academic. She's author of Lockdown Diaries of the Working Class. Her work focuses upon issues of social and class inequality and builds upon the narratives of working class communities collected through political ethnographic research. And I believe you're now a playwright as well?
Yeah.
Hey!
Well done.
Well done. Okay. So another string to Lisa's bow. Third is Dave Clements on the far left. Dave is a writer and a policy advisor with over 2 decades of experience working in the public sector, particularly in children's services, health and social care. He's written for a variety of publications, including The Guardian, Huffington Post and Spite. He's also author of the forthcoming book, The Crisis in the Classroom. And finally, on my far right, purely positionally, let's not start that discussion. I have Gawain Towler. Gawain, between 2004 and 2017, Gawain was press officer for UKIP, initially in the European Parliament in Brussels, and from 2009 heading the department in London. Until recently, he was head of press for Reform UK, and he has since been elected by members to sit on the party's governing board. Is that correct? He's an international political strategist and historian, has written for most national publications. When he's not working, he can mostly be found in pub gardens and ancient churches across these islands. And if you follow him on social media, there's one church or pub after another. So I've asked the speakers to speak for about 6 minutes each and then get out to what should be a lively discussion. So, Jean-André, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good evening, everyone. As we're at a festival of ideas, I thought I'd better start my remarks with a fairly fundamental idea, and that is the idea of disability. I think we have either a notion of disabled people as superheroes or disabled people as incapable. And this idea distracts from the heroic concept of disabled people, distracts from the very human desires and needs of disabled people. They are just people, like me, like you, like everyone here. But we have this notion of them, which I think is very, very difficult, and others disabled people. But on the other hand, we see disabled people as incapable. This is a reductive quality for our desire to protect, one in which disabled people recognise and struggle to overcome. Protection is often manifest with infantilization, and the enormous economic and creative potential of disabled people is overlooked and undervalued. And disabled people are too often seen as through a cost lens, rather than in consideration of their potential. And therefore, to reform our welfare system, I think we need to fundamentally reconsider how we see disabled people, and we need to recalibrate it to one where we try to enable people rather than to support and mostly to protect. And part of this issue revolves around the good move, in my view, from a medical model of disability to a social model of disability. And put simply, that the medical model, which kind of existed before the 1980s, was one that suggested that disability was a deficiency in the individual, while the social model views disability because of the barriers put forward by society. And being disabled now is seen just as a manifestation of the diversity of society. And the changing perception of disability has led to an increasing number of people as self-declaring as disabled. Today, 1 in 4 people consider themselves disabled. There are about 600,000 people eligible for disability benefits in 1990, and now that is about 7 million people. There's a particular increase in recent years in the number of young people claiming these benefits and people with mental health conditions. Nearly 1 in 10 people of working age are now on at least one sickness or disability benefit. Over 2.8 million people are out of work with long-term sickness benefits. 1,000 people a day are claiming personal independence payment, and that would mean over the course of a year the size of the city of Leicester, and 5,000 people a day are now deemed incapable of work, and over the course of a week that would mean they could fill the size of the O2. So given that framework that I've just set out, I think we need to look at fundamentally what our benefit system is trying to do and whether it is the right framework given the great numbers now that are coming through the gateway onto these benefits. And so I'm going to talk about personal independence payment. And this is an extra cost benefit. But given the number of people now claiming disability benefits and personal independence payment, one has to consider whether all these people, they may well be disabled, all these people actually incur an extra cost. So we need to consider whether there's some types of support that might be better suited to them than merely a financial benefit. So I'm going to talk about a few things that I think could help change the debate and the narrative around these benefits. Firstly, I actually think some of the things that the government tried to do in the previous reforms were actually quite good. That's not actually been discussed a lot, but the idea that you shouldn't have an extra financial incentive in the work capability assessment to show what you cannot do, I think is a positive thing. And I think too many times our benefit system is framed around trying to show what you cannot do rather than what you could be able to do. So I think that was a positive by removing the work capability assessment. And they'll do that by 2028. And so there's a couple of ideas that I have. One, probably my most controversial idea, is especially for young people, personal independence payment, while it's an extra cost benefit, should become a conditional benefit. That means that people, the reason behind that is because PIP claimants, for example, 40% increase for young people 16 to 25 since 2019. And I think this is really damaging. And 70% of young people now claiming personal independence payment are claiming it for mental health problems. And we know that individuals who apply for PIP, 37% of them are in work when they claim. But within a year, it's only 23%. So while it's an extra cost benefit, it does lead to a reduction in employment. And therefore, I think there's a real argument to be had about ensuring people have a stake in our society. And therefore, personal independence payment for young people in particular, 16 to 30, should be made a conditional benefit on partaking in something in society. That doesn't actually mean just work. It means volunteering, possibly education, some form of formal employment, but basically creating the sense that you're involved in society. And secondly, I think our benefits are merely a test about getting on to some sort of financial support. So therefore, when you go to a benefits assessment, you never discuss what types of needs you might have. It's all about what you cannot do to get the extra money. So I think assessments need to be fundamentally changed into more of a conversation around what the society can do to help you. So for example, they should discuss things like access to work in a benefits assessment. Rather, it's just merely about what you cannot do to get the money that you need. And finally, because I think I'm probably running out of time, we have a very static benefit system. Our system hasn't changed since 2012, 2013, when the Welfare Reform Act came into force. But our society has fundamentally changed over that period. And so I think there's a level at which Parliament has become impotent and not done its job of actually reevaluating whether these benefits are correctly are actually correctly helping people. So I think every couple of years, frankly, the assessment criteria for these benefits should be reevaluated and actually should be voted on in Parliament. And I think it's a great shame that we don't have a more of an open conversation, frankly, about these benefits. And instead, every time we try to reform it, it becomes a massive, and you can see it in March, a massive debate rather than an iterative debate that happens all the time about whether we've got the right level of support for the right types of people. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Right.
Is it me? Yes, thank you for inviting me, and I think this is a great panel actually, and a really important subject. So you were right when you said that, I'm a working class academic, but what do I do? Well, I'm a sociologist, and for 20 years I've been doing research, ethnographic research, which is bottom up, working with people, and particularly always with working class people. The first piece of research I did, which was for my PhD, was on the council estate where I used to live. And this is important to the wider issue, because what was I doing? I was interviewing and working with women who lived on the estate, mothers mostly, and just talking to them about their lives and what was happening. And I'd done an undergraduate degree in sociology and social policy. So, the idea that, the state and policy, it sort of interacts with people's lives. I knew that from personal experience, but also from the education that I'd got. So talking to mothers on the estate, what they often told me was the way that their lives were completely interactive with state intervention, with benefits, with welfare, and particularly how the welfare system was actually a system, and a system that didn't really work for them. And I'll give you an example of this before I sort of go on to the other areas. One of the things that we talk a lot about, especially in working class communities, when other people are talking about working class communities, they talk about family life, and whether, that usually working class families have got the deficit model, usually doing something wrong, or they're accused of doing something wrong. Well, one of the things that the mothers told me about the benefit system, it was a council estate, so everybody lived in social housing. Most of the mothers worked part-time. But one of the things that they said is, in order to survive, to get a house that they could afford to live in, they had to say that they were a single parent. And it didn't matter whether they were or not, they had to say that. And the system wouldn't allow them to kind of live or be as a family, because if your husband or your partner was also in a very low paid job, you'd kind of be penalized for that. So what families were doing is just trying to make the best of things. And I remember the last question I also always asked women was, what is your hope for the future? Because when you talk to mothers on council estates, there's lots of problems and lots of things that are going wrong. So I always say, what's your hope for the future? And many of those women and those mothers said that they hoped that they'd get a full-time job and their partner would get a full-time job and they could live together as a proper family. So the ambition was not to be part of a welfare dependency culture. That was never what it was about. But unfortunately, the structure of the system, which is almost like a race to the bottom, meant that they were left with little choices but to sort of play into a stereotype about them, and then allowed that stereotype to constantly be told around them. So when we're talking about welfare, what are we talking about? We're talking about housing, we're talking about pensions, we're talking about unemployment benefit as well as disability benefits. It's not one thing, it's a number of things, and they do all interrelate. At the moment, we've got a housing crisis, that is affecting welfare. It's absolutely affecting welfare. And again, I can give examples of this. I'm writing a new book about what's happening in class in Britain. I'm talking to lots of men. I'm talking to lots of young men with jobs. These are not unemployed people who are now finding themselves in HMOs, houses of multiple occupation. Why? Because of what a one-bedroom flat is out of their reach. And so what I'm also talking to is other men and women who are working and are underemployed. They can't find enough employment. So what is happening is they're looking to find other ways to try and top up their wages. Or if they're on benefits, the housing benefit is not covering it covers social rent, but getting a social housing is absolutely impossible now. So private rent, it doesn't even nearly cover it. So what they are having to do is find other ways to try and pay that. And sometimes that means looking for getting a higher welfare benefit, and that might be disability benefits. What I suppose I'm going to finish with, because I want us to have the debate here, is employment is also, and it's also sort of tangled in this as well. Good employment that pays people a decent wage so they can, so they can stand on their own 2 feet, so they can find somewhere to live. There are incredible rates of underemployment at the moment, especially for young people, not being able to find jobs that will, a 30, 40-hour job. They can't find it. There's 15-hour jobs here, 10-hour jobs there. That's not proper work. So I mean, this is what I'm sort of looking at figures at the moment, and I'm really thinking about this and thinking about the people I'm interviewing. We have 1.7 million people unemployed. That's 4.8 of the population, and that's rising. I guess that we have got an extremely high unemployment rate, but it is being hidden in the welfare system. The Thatcher government started this when they tried to hide the unemployment rates in the 1980s, and they moved lots of people onto disability benefits. I imagine that's where we are again. I've got a yellow card. So I think, while we're talking about welfare, I think we need to really be honest about what is happening in our economy.
Okay, thank you. Right, Dave.
Thank you. We have a welfare problem. The damage done by lockdown, for instance, can't be underestimated. 2 years of unprecedented state intervention, 1.5 years of furlough for 12 million people. Now we've got 1 in 10 people of working age on sickness or disability benefits, 1 million young people on NEETs or not in education, employment or training. PIP claims are set to double this decade, especially since those reforms failed. Long-term sickness increased by 500,000 between 2019 and 2022. The rise of the sickfluencer, which is an online influencer, was blamed for the abuse of the Access to Work scheme. Mental health claims for that scheme rose from 5% a decade ago to 1/3 of all of those claims. The cost of the scheme has doubled in 7 years. Claims have included things like claims for the smartwatches, wobble boards, fidget toys, these kinds of things. A Freedom of Information request in April found that over 500,000 people signed up to the now infamous Motability scheme, many of them with things like anxiety disorders, depressive disorders, and ADHD. So I think a lot of our discontent today, both material and spiritual, started, or at least got worse, during lockdown. But I think other trends, such as the rise in ADHD, the rise in autism, mental health problems, behavioural issues, these all stretch back much longer, sometimes a couple of decades, or perhaps more. So we do have a welfare problem. But looked at another way, it's not really about welfare at all. The title of this session, PIPs, who can reform welfare? I think in a way that's the wrong question to ask. It's not really about welfare. It's about us. It's about the needs crisis in society. It's true that there's rapidly growing welfare claims, as we've mentioned already, and some conditions that claimants cite should perhaps not qualify. And some schemes are perhaps open to exploitation. However, I think we should be thinking about reforming ourselves. I think we've become dysfunctional, dependent, broken. We're not working. We're signing ourselves off. We're disabling ourselves. We're seeking out our own vulnerabilities. Of course, some people are sick and some people are disabled and some people are playing the system. But the question I'd ask is, are they, either of those two groups, responsible for what I would describe as a needs explosion? I think we need to look beyond PIP and the welfare debate to some extent as well. I'm the father of a boy with ADHD and autism. And I've kind of noticed similarities in this discussion around the welfare system with the SEND system, which is the Special Educational Needs and Disabilities System. And also there's parallels with the rise in neurodiversity or claims and diagnoses and special educational needs around, again, autism, ADHD and other similar conditions. So again, you've got this problem of a real, genuine need existing there, but at the same time, there's this explosion of needs and there's an overwhelming of the system, and that's happening both in the education system and in welfare. In the 20 years to 2023, the number of children on Disability Living Allowance, or DLA, which is the children's equivalent of PIP in England and Wales, it doubled. 1 in 16 children now receive DLA. In 2023, 4 out of 5 of those children cited a learning disability, a behavioural disorder, or ADHD as their main condition. Compared to PIP, it's quite comparatively small in terms of numbers, but most of those children who are on a DLA go on to PIPs. So, what can be done about it? I think all of these individuals, the children and the adults, are responding to social pressures and cultural signals. They're told their difficulties are in their heads, which in a way they are, but not in the way that's meant. They're offered labels to describe the problems they face. Misbehaving kids are told they have ADHD or a conduct disorder. Troubled adults, unable to cope with the workplace, are signed off sick, or they're told that they're suffering from stress. So instead of taking responsibility for ourselves and our families, our schools, our workplaces, we make a dubious claim in both senses of the word. So just to conclude, it might sound unlikely, but I wonder if we rebuilt a more old-fashioned sense of ourselves as independent, robust and responsible individuals, would the welfare problem solve itself?
Thank you very much. Gawain.
Thank you, Rob. I have to admit I'm not a huge expert in the field, so bear with me. I think that from all the figures that we've been hearing, we clearly have this explosion, as you call the need explosion. I think it's a very good way of describing it. When I think of it is getting to the point because, and I think the cover-up of employment is extremely important here, just like we have 50% of people going to university. I think that's more about masking unemployment figures than it is, in fact, trying to educate people, particularly given some of the things that they are taught. But I think what's happened, particularly in schools, and once it's in your head as a child, it becomes your default position as you go through life. And it has become aspirational to have a condition. It's a bit like the old, you've got an ology, but now you've got a problem. But it's not a problem because it's aspirational, and you can get extra time in your exams, and you can get a financial benefit from having a problem. And therefore, we are now building in this into our entire society. But the bottom line is we are broke. We are broke as a society. We are we know that next month we're going to have a budget that's going to tax us more, and you don't tax yourself into prosperity. But the problem with the welfare explosion, and as was seen very, very clearly the rebellion, the backbench rebellion, that didn't stop. It wasn't about cutting $5 billion off welfare spending. It was cutting $5 billion off the increase in welfare spending. It wasn't even touching the sides when it comes to the major problem. And I know, yes, of course, those people who have genuine disabilities have to be looked after. But I believe that there is a welfare fatigue in the productive aspects of the economy who are paying more and more tax to see their neighbours not working and receiving the money that I've been working for, and the next door is getting it. And I think that what we are seeing, and I think as we go through the next 4 years of this government failing to address this because it can't, even if it might want to, the question is who can do it. In the past, you'd have said, well, if it's a welfare issue, you can trust Labour. Labour have a better chance because they're trusted on this subject. Well, they're not anymore. And so therefore, who can address it? And the only sort of hope that I've got here is that this reality, as we look across the country and see this vast increase in claim after claim after claim and the Motability scheme, it's not actually, I was listening to the Radio 4 the other day, I think there's 43,000 people have claimed on the Motability scheme for ADHD or something like that. So it's not huge numbers, but there again, 43,000 BMWs is quite expensive. And I do feel that sometimes the Motability scheme is a way of getting people to have electric cars who wouldn't be able to afford them anyhow. So there is that aspect to it. But I do think that the Overton window, just as it has moved very rapidly on immigration, the Overton window on welfare spending is also shifting fast. I go around the country 2 or 3 times a week doing public meetings, and I can feel this feeling that, hold on, this isn't working. We cannot continue like this. And I do agree. I mean, we talk about resilience. We want our children to be resilient. But what we teach them is the benefits of not being resilient. You actually win. You can game the system. You can do this. And I think the tragedy of people being forced to live apart, even though they want to be in a family, the sociological impact of that are disgraceful and diabolical. We shouldn't be having a welfare system that actually mitigates about people bringing their children up more effectively. But I go back to, whenever I think about this subject, I think about Kennedy's inauguration speech. We've now got the opposite, haven't we? Think not what you can do for your country. Think what the country can do for you. And that is where we've got. And in the end, we will break unless we try to handle this. But I don't think Labour can do it.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, so there's all sorts of different layers to this one. So I'm going to... So where are the microphones? Right. So microphone there, could you start coming down this way? So there's a hand in the aisle there and one there. Just the first one. So this guy here first.
Hi. I think to an extent there's a little bit of over-intellectualization when it comes to this issue. I understand there's the structural issues. I understand there's the mental side of things. But fundamentally, I think a big part of this is that some people just don't want to work. You know, I come from council state. Thank you. I come from a working class background in council estates in North London, and I know plenty of people who are not disabled. They're in any way, shape or form. They're perfectly fit and healthy, and they just do not want to work. You know, you can talk about the structural issues in the economy. You can talk about the structural issues in the welfare system. I know, for example, universal credit, you know, it's a massive cliff edge. I'm fully aware of these issues, but we need to be honest here and say that actually loads of people around this country just simply do not want to work. And unless you use a big stick to say, get off your arse and get to the job centre or get to work, then you're not going to solve this issue.
Okay, so this one here. Can you bring the microphone forward?
I'd be interested in some of the discussions to develop Dave's point about it being a political question, because two words for me around this debate that feel important. One is independence and the other one's solidarity. It's all very well saying people have to go to work, but there is a complexity that people are now bound into that has created a dependency culture. So you can't just say, get off your arse and go and work, because often there's subsidies to working through all sorts of, family credits and all sorts of various different things. So it's not straightforward. There's dependency around things like Sure Start. You can't just leave your child in a nursery. There's a dependency around parenting. There's lots of ways the state has made people into vulnerability. And I think there's something there that I think, for example, with reform, you've got a big task.
Oh, yeah.
You need to open up yourselves to public discussion to create the opportunities for discussion that builds on things like the suspicion around things like digital ID, but starts to get people to see themselves as independent agents and having some independence and open up. And how do you build that tension between people who are poor, who are trying to make the best of it, versus people who don't want to pay higher taxes to subsidise those people who are in difficult situations? You need to open up yourselves to more public debate and scrutiny in your conferences. You need to have more public discussion to get people opening discussions around these issues. And I think one thing that you could do is you could change it so that young people can start working again from the age of 12, doing paper rounds, getting out there, doing milk rounds, get rid of all this safeguarding stuff, get people out there in the communities to start working from young ages to be independent, thinking of themselves as independent young people, like I did. We all did when we were younger. We went out working. There was a culture of wanting to work. And I think we need that. Challenging that safeguarding culture would be really difficult.
Okay, so if you could pass the microphone back and then just all of you.
Yeah, I take exception to the person who said people don't want to work. I think, there may be. I've got a brother that doesn't work. All the girls in the family, worked really hard. But my main point was just to say that I think it's a top-down issue. I work with people who are being released from prison. And when they come to the probation office, we have the DWP there waiting to sort out their benefits. Now, the work situation for them is grim. People need to be able to be rehabilitated back into the workforce. We need, more opportunities for really talented people who are excluded. So I think we've got a culture where we just want to stick people on benefits rather than allow them to develop themselves.
So PIP generally for mental health it doesn't encourage you to get better. If you have a 2-year PIP award, it doesn't financially make sense for you to have therapy, to take responsibility for your own wellness and get better. Because if you do, the financial amount stops. If you choose not to take medication, not to take therapy, not to get better, you get more money. That doesn't make any sense and isn't healthy for somebody to grow and just be happier.
Okay, yeah. So pass that microphone forward and yes. Sir.
Yeah, just quick. It seems that, Lisa, you're arguing that welfare is dependency is a kind of a structural issue because people are poor, need it because of unemployment. And Dave, you're also trying to argue, or you seem to be arguing, that dependency on welfare is a cultural issue. So is it primarily one or the other, or is it both?
It strikes me that so the point was made about as people who don't want to work. It strikes me that we have a dependency culture for people who are in work now, and I think a sea change that took place around lockdown. So obviously we were all placed under house arrest for periods of up to 2 years, and that's brought about a real change in people's attitude towards their responsibility. So some people never came back, never had kind of adopted the same levels of responsibility they held pre-lockdown, and post-lockdown, people's relationship to work and working and their responsibilities in that context have changed as well. It's kind of in some places, the civil service is a good example, but it applies to private industry as well. It's a hell of a job getting people to actually work in their office, in their place of work, the place where they're contracted to work. I'm sure a lot of new contracts of employment are for remote working contracts. Yeah, remote working's great. I would have bitten somebody's arm off for it when I had young children. But it's kind of, I think we all have to kind of, when it comes to responsibility, yes, it's top down, but it's also bottom up. We have to step up as well.
Yeah, hello, Martin Lote is my name. In terms of this getting people back to work, we've heard top down and bottom up. What we haven't heard of is about people starting their own businesses and being entrepreneurial, small, medium size. I know a little bit about what I speak. About 30 years ago, I started my own business. When I sold it, we had 50 people, 50 jobs created. And I did it without any backing, just because I got down, knuckled down and did it. Is this needs explosion? I think it's a great term. Is it just breeding a group of people who just will not only give up on getting back into normal employed work, but have very little chance of starting their own businesses? Even though I know from my own case, I created 50 jobs. It's possible, but it needs a bit of encouragement. I'd call it middle out rather than top down or bottom up.
Okay, thank you. Lisa is itching to get
I'm just despair. I feel despair, actually. Right. I don't know who you're talking about, because where I live in Nottinghamshire, there are young people desperate to work. They put on Facebook, it's heartbreaking every day. My son has been looking for a job. He's applied for 2,000 jobs. He'll do anything, labouring. Where I am, there is warehouses everywhere. The decent jobs, I don't know where you think they are. In Nottinghamshire, the average wage is 27,000. The average income is 16,000. The average 2-bedroom privately rented home is £1,200 a month. Do the maths. It's not working. People are underemployed. People are desperate to. I don't know where this. People, or perhaps some people. Yes, we all know people who don't want to work, but I know a lot more that do. Agency working is not a job. Being told you've got 4 hours here and 10 hours there, trying to do 7 different jobs in 1 week is not a job. Something is terrible at the bottom. I've had a business. Try having a business when you are you're working every day in different jobs, and you've got £1,200 a month to pay in rent. I don't know who you are talking about.
Okay, thank you.
I'll comment on the person over there who was talking about PIP again, and I think the key point I was trying to make is that our system, not only is our notions of disability too binary, as I think I said, but also our assessment process is too binary. So to your point about mental health challenges, of course there are some people with mental health challenges who do incur an extra cost and need some support for that. But I do think our system is too binary. It doesn't provide the types of support that might help those types of individuals. And, as I kind of mentioned, when you go to a PIP assessment, for example, if you have mental health challenges, they should be telling you about talking therapies, for example, rather than just telling you could get rather than just giving you some additional money. Now, I think our system is not flexible enough to deal with the complexity and different types of needs we have. And that is the fundamental shift we need to have to ensure we have a better system.
Okay, thank you. Dave?
On this people not wanting to work thing, that's always been the case to some extent. Arguably, because of our culture, I think that it is a cultural issue. More people are able to find ways of making that acceptable to themselves, or to explain that away. In the past, we would have had this kind of culture of the people are scrounging, and that sort of language was around in the 80s, and some people kind of agreed with that, some people didn't. Whereas now, I think it's a bit more kind of fuzzy. People kind of just allow themselves to not partake or to not work, and to find ways of excusing that. And I think that does happen. So I think there's an element in which people do need to kind of just take responsibility for themselves. There is also an element of what somebody said about the state encouraging that and rewarding that by kind of dishing out these labels for people to attach to themselves. So I think that's all true. And also somebody mentioned the pandemic, and you called it house arrest, and it certainly felt that way. And I think I agree, that had a huge impact on people. People are still home working now, and which I think is wrong, although I of course do it. And as I think most people who write about it, because most writers do tend to work at home, but there are a number of factors here but I think that and we can perhaps over intellectualize it. But I think it's important to try and grapple with the changes that have happened in recent years, certainly since lockdown, in the past couple of decades, as we've started thinking about ourselves in rather a different way. And we do tend to see ourselves as being quite vulnerable. We do tend to see ourselves as wanting to, we tend to want to identify with different kind of conditions, and we tend to accept that in a way that we wouldn't have in the past.
Okay, Gawain?
Oof, a whole bunch of things here. Yes, reform does need to continue and open up and have those discussions without a shadow of doubt. We do. We're clearly not there yet, and we need to do so. So, yeah, so I agree there. One thing I don't think has been touched on, we're talking about, we have mentioned the sort of mask of unemployment and by using this 5,000 people a week transferring from unemployment through to medical, so therefore never coming back into the workplace, for the reasons we've been discussing. I think there's one huge elephant in the room. In the next 5 to 10 years, the impact of AI on the employment sector is going to be devastating to white-collar workers particularly, in a way that blue-collar workers were hammered by robotics and automation and things of that sort in the factory system. So I don't think we're even beginning to think seriously on the impact of AI on the welfare system and the requirements of welfare and the requirements of people where there are great swathes of jobs that just do not exist anymore. That is coming down the line whether we like it or not. And if we have a welfare system like we do today, we are so screwed. We are.
Okay. Cheery thought. I was just picking up on what Lisa said and also what Jean-André said. It's very easy to get into a kind of carrot and stick discussion, but do we need to just change the carrot? As in, what we're doing at the moment was offering people money as a simple way of getting rid of them, as it were, rather than offering them jobs that they can actually live on. And also, what you're saying about the cost of housing. I mean, if we don't tackle the cost of housing by building some more houses, then people are going to get caught in these traps, are they not? Anyway, so, can I see microphone? Actually, start with the person behind you there.
Yeah, on the carrot and stick, clearly welfare spending is out of control. It's a real problem. As somebody that works hard, I totally get it. That it's sickening that there is a lot of people on benefits that shouldn't be. But the elephants in the room, the real elephant in the room is that we're not talking about how to engender productive growth, because the reality is it's been described already. People are working 16-hour contracts or 15 hours, because if you go to 16, then you lose your benefits. The only way we're going to be able to resolve welfare, the overspend on it, is to start thinking about, and maybe reform will be able to do this if they get into power, but they'll have to really start thinking about it. Start thinking about how productive growth, real growth, can be encouraged. And without that, anything else, with respect, talking about AI coming down the line and financial tsunamis, that's just excuse making, and the problem's too serious for that.
Yes, two things. So the first thing is absolutely we need jobs for people to want to aspire to and want to do and feel a bit of dignity about. So without that, we're on to a complete loser. Because I understand the patterns of work you're talking about. I know that too. The other part, though, is something, is it David at the end? Yes. I work in a university, or I did until I retired last week. But it used to be 20 years ago that there'd maybe be a handful of students with reasonable adjustments in the classroom. Now it's half. And it's all things like anxiety. I can't meet deadlines. I can't do my essays. I can't do a presentation because I'm too anxious. I have a listening disorder, so I can't hear instructions. Seriously, we had a primary education student who couldn't stand up in front of people and talk. And our disability advisors wanted us to make an adjustment for that. So that's what's happening in the education system. So there's a terrible cultural thing going on there. I don't know how we tackle that. Hi, I wanted to focus on the plight of disabled people who are being exploited in the workplace. There was a social media story. So let's remember the Waitrose story of the young lad who's autistic. I was shocked to discover that after hours of volunteering, when it came to his parents saying, hey, how about getting a paid job to start with, it was like not good enough. So one of the things is we do need radical reform. We actually find also disabled people missing from this conversation. And also, I just wanted to bring to the plight of those who have come to me, because it's not obvious, actually. I myself have a disability. It's invisible. So that's why I've started to operate in this space. Don't forget, when disabled people identify and say, hey, I'm disabled, do you think anyone wants to hire them? And if Keir Starmer wants disabled people to get back to work, I suggest he bloody well opens up positions in his own government and committee, because it's funny how I never see anyone in a wheelchair or with disability. So I just want to say, yes, there are a proportion, but there's also many being exploited because they're not deemed good enough, and we need to solve that. That's all.
Okay, so can that microphone go over there and this lady here?
Okay. I agree with David. I think that there is a problem with the explosion of needs. I totally agree with that. I think lockdown was a huge problem, created so many problems. But I also find myself agreeing with Lisa. Especially around housing. But also we have a huge problem because we have a health service and a social care service that is on its knees, totally broken. 2.6 million people are caring, have given up work in order to care because of the holes in the system. 600 people a day leaving employment to prop up a very broken system. And it's something that we need to consider.
I've been unemployed for the last year after 40 years working. I'm looking at minimum wage jobs, advertised as full time, but actually only offering 15 hours, but you have to be available to work another 20 if needed. Ridiculous shift patterns or jobs with asking for experience in half a dozen software packages, but not offering any training. And also remote working. My most recent job was remote working. I think people think remote workers just skive off because you're all professional people and you can do what you want. If you're on a low-level job, you've got software that monitors everything you do. If you disappear, if you're inactive for 4 or 5 minutes, you'll get a manager calling you up. You have managers that try and insist on people having their cameras on all day in their own home. Yeah. You know.
Okay.
They're subsidising big business at the moment.
Hi, I'm John Kelly. I spent 25 years running government training initiatives for unemployed adults and unemployed youth. The notion that people don't want to work is completely wrong. What happens to people is they become unemployed, and that is a shock to their system. We all have a role set, which is our family, our friends, our work colleagues, people that we meet at the golf club or the tennis club or whatever activities we indulge in life. And as soon as you become unemployed, you find that gets heavily reduced. And then over a period of time, the government has compounded that by saying that you are only allowed to get onto any kind of initiative once you have been unemployed for 6 months, which by then, of course, you've now settled into a situation where you don't have an income or not the same kind of income as you did have. And just as an example, I can honestly say that on the very first day I started running government initiatives, I met a chap. And on the very last day before I left my job, I met him again. And he'd been going through that gate for 25 years. So we are getting it wrong. We need to have a complete and utter rethink about it, because we're not going to address the issue unless we start putting some blue sky thinking in and having a proper look at it. And you can't rely on electing reform to solve the problem.
Okay, just you've reminded me back in 1992. I moved to Edinburgh, thinking there'd be loads of jobs in all those big insurance companies, and I was unemployed for 6 months, and then I was forced to go onto a training scheme. Good news, I learned to touch type, so that was a result that's benefited me the rest of my life. And then after a few months on that scheme, I got a placement for a week as an administrator, and as I walked through the door, the boss said, "We've just sacked the administrator, so if you're any good, we'll employ you. So after that a week, they said, yeah, you're all right. We'll employ you. And the centre said, oh, that's brilliant. You're the first person we've got a job for 5 years. Anyway, I'll go along the panel. Dave.
On the reasonable adjustments point, yeah, the reasonable adjustments in themselves are a good thing, and for those people with disabilities who need them. But it's become a real problem in education, both in primary schools, secondary schools, and at universities. Even Oxford and Cambridge have started to increase the use of these kinds of measures, and it is a real problem. In schools, they call it the whole school approach, or inclusion, or the neurodivergent education. And I think it has one of two effects. It either creates resentment amongst the other students who also want to have those kinds of experiences, that kind of support, or it creates a contagion where everybody starts claiming to have these needs. So it's a real problem. The other thing somebody said something about disabled people being exploited and being mistreated, and it's an important point, because I think what gets lost in all of this is that there are real needs in existence that these benefits are at least designed to support. And I think there is what somebody called fatigue about this topic, and people simply don't believe the numbers. They can't believe that all of these people are possibly sick or disabled, and they're right to believe that. And I think what we need to do is not maintain this pretense that it is all real need, without forgetting that there are real needs out there. So that's the kind of thing to hold in your head, I think, because otherwise this becomes an argument for cuts, or it becomes an argument for certain conditions not being supported, and it's more complex than that, I think.
Okay, Jean-André?
Just taking that point, I think the issue remains around this point I was talking about the static nature of the benefits is they're put in place. You talk about the WCA, which is 2008, talk about personal payments 2012, and the Parliament hasn't looked at these benefits since then. Obviously, we've had these rebellions, we've had multiple. The Conservative Party tried to do something in 2017 on it. Obviously, the Labour Party tried to do something recently on it, and nothing has been able to be done. So over time, you've had the gateway just increase, and it creates this issue around people thinking that certain disabilities aren't quote unquote real, and therefore shouldn't be getting the support. And so it's basically the lack of Parliament constantly reevaluating whether the support is correctly in place. And there was a point made about younger people. I think this is really, really important, because David made this point before about DLA, and it is a relatively small amount of money compared to personal independence payment, but the stickiness of all these benefits, you definitely see it when you talk about incapacity benefit. You see it with personal independence payment. Once people are on these benefits, it's very difficult for them to move off. So we really need to make a much more proactive effort of, one, supporting people on incapacity benefits in particular, where the stickiness is extremely, extremely strong. And obviously personal independence payments are to do with extra costs and to do with disability, to do with extra costs, and it's not to do with working. So it's slightly different. But we need to be much more proactive, because it's very difficult to move people off. So it goes back to the kind of arguments that the man was making over there around 6 months, how proactive you are immediately as these people get on these benefits to try and give them other levers of support. So it's just not a financial bit of support, but some other levers that they might have at their disposal to help them.
Okay, Lisa? Oh, sorry, yes. Oh,
yeah. 2 points. First one was about the woman at the back who sort of said about the post that was on social media last night about Waitrose. I don't know if you saw that. A young man, his mum had posted, he's done 600 free hours working at Waitrose, stacking the shelves. His family approached Waitrose. He loves the job. He's autistic. He's got autism. And they said, could he get paid now? And they said, no, he's not good enough to be paid. So this is happening. And I think back to, I used to work in a factory. I used to work at Pretty Polly in the 1980s. I was there 12 years, actually. And we had people in the 80s with a range of disabilities who used to work alongside us and doing different jobs. and it never seemed to be a problem. And I think that it's very recently now that disabled people are not being that they're not being integrated into workplaces with everybody else. And then the other thing is this sort of explosion of needs. I work in a university. I work at the University of Bedfordshire, which is mostly working class adults coming back into education. We don't see the explosion in these needs in the same way as other universities. I did work at the University of Durham, which is a very elite university, and it was quite astounding how many upper middle class people had got dyslexia to get those extra hours that they needed. So, I think there is something here about this, and I think there is. It's perhaps not as clear cut as you think.
Okay, go on. I've been thinking about this, and this, as society has convinced itself it's got kinder and nicer, what we have actually seen is a greater level of split between those who are actually disabled and not disabled. I go around churches, and a couple of days ago, I was in a church somewhere in the Midlands, and I noticed this great wall tablet. And this chap, he ended his career as the governor of the Royal Hospital in Greenwich, the Chelsea home but for sailors. His first naval engagement in 1790 or so, he lost a leg. He then went on to 20 years, still serving in the Royal Navy, still fighting battles, and still being very effective and getting himself up to admiral. Now, clearly, today, if you lost a leg, that'd be out. You'd be out of the army, you'd be out of the navy, sod it, go away, you're no longer. But actually, he was clearly a competent sailor, even though he had one leg. Now, the point I'm making is that disability in various forms is in no way some way you can't work, as Liz was saying. And I think it's something strange about this society that's so much more equal, so much more diverse, so much more caring, so much more loving, but actually reality on the ground is going opposite.
Okay, right. So can I get the microphone down the front, please?
Hi. So there's one point that hasn't been mentioned so far, which is the rise in the retirement age. And this is a factor which has had quite a lot of effect on PIP and the amount of people claiming. And the one thing I was going to say is that we really need to work out in society what we're going to do for manual workers with regard to the rise in retirement age, because it's fine perhaps being a lawyer and working till 70, but not as a roofer. I mean, that is just not realistic. So we need to provide properly for manual workers.
Okay.
Hello. So hearing the discussion, I thought we also have to look from point of view of employers, how easy it is to employ people. Because I'm in medicine, and when I first came to Britain, I had to send 400 application forms handwritten to get a first job in an area that actually half the jobs were empty. And I was thinking, why? And the response was, oh, you don't have any experience here. I said, cool, so I'm in a catch-22. And I was thinking that people who are out of employment for a while, they will have the same predicament. They want references. And it's much worse now. If you want to employ, you have to go lots of mandatory training, DBS, that, the bureaucracy is crazy. And how could we get people who have been out of employment through this kind of Kafkaesque system?
I think we also need to consider causes. And certainly in my family, addiction is an issue. Not personally speaking, but family members. In my extended family, I have members of family on PIP as a result of being diagnosed with anxiety because of cocaine use. And there are 9, in an extended family, 9 children in care. So costing a fortune to the local authority. And obviously those children will be expected to get poorer outcomes as a result. And I also think as far as solutions, Fraser Nelson recently did a really good documentary on Channel 4, and he identified that Ian Duncan Smith actually reduced the amount of benefits being paid out in 2013. And the main reason that was that they actually had checks on people who were claiming, and that was abandoned, and now it is all self-ID, and there are no checks and balances. There is no effort to get people off PIP.
Okay, now this is turning into one of those kind of omni sessions where everybody says, and then there's another thing. So, panel, I'm going to come back to you shortly, and I'd like you to suggest one thing that we could do to reform welfare that would actually have an impact. Sorry, if you could. So if that could go back up the aisle, and then you, sorry.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, okay, thank you. So the discussion is who's going to reform welfare, right? Now, there's a popular phrase in the political economy, the cognitive dissonance of the West, which means we're extremely good at diagnosing the problem and extremely bad at dealing with the urgency of addressing it. So can I suggest that we have three people who can solve things that can solve the welfare crisis? Number one is we could do something about it ourselves. Been a handful of suggestions here today. Number two is that the investment market, the bond market in particular, will force us to change. And so it's the bond market that will bring about the necessary reforms in welfare. And the third is Donald Trump. Because the reality is Europe and the other places worse than the UK has basically been subsidizing their welfare by underspending on defense. And if the US pulls the plug on NATO, we will be forced into a situation where we have to reform everything, not just welfare. So I think there's a degree of urgency here that we need to address that I don't sense that we really know what the answer is.
Right, so we've got a hand down here, and yes, sir.
I'm fully aware that, as many of you know, that the number of people diagnosed with things like ASD, ADHD is massively increasing. But I think it's a bit naive to imagine that these people suddenly now have these conditions. That's just not the case. These people throughout time have always had these conditions. It's just only now that they're being recognized and they're actually able to receive these support. And I know that because I'm one of them, and my family has conditions of this, and my parents weren't able to get anywhere near the amount of support that I am. And you might say that, oh, in Durham, there's a massive amount of people getting this benefit. And I say, yeah, that's true. We should look at why is that? Well, maybe it's the fault of the education system that actually punishes you. It doesn't say how much you know, but it says how quick you're able to write it down. If I wasn't able to have extra time to write down what I want to write down, the knowledge, I have the knowledge up here, then I wouldn't have been able to get the grades that I got. You know, it's not the fault of the people who have those things. Things like taking medication for ADHD, that doesn't harm anyone. It increases the cognitive function. It's a benefit. It allows those people to be more productive in society, to achieve better results and contribute more. I don't see how that should be viewed negatively. And just as well, people with these conditions don't need to be poor, not contributing people. You know, high functioning ASD is a massive thing. And there are people all throughout society that are really contributing and having really value adding roles in society with these conditions. And it's actually a part of looking at why is it that they need to have that support in the first place. If we had a society that was inclusive, that was set up to actually empower people with these conditions and without, then there wouldn't be a problem, in my view.
I suspect that many in this room would regard reducing people with all their individual distinctiveness to units of economic value as uncouth and unsavory, but that's how employers look at it. Every employment decision is based on one simple premise: will this individual add more economic value on a marginal basis per hour than what I have to pay them? This autistic lad from Waitrose that we've talked about, what they were saying when they said he wasn't good enough to be employed was not he's not good enough to be employed. It's that the minimum wage they have to pay him is higher than the marginal value productivity he could bring. The minimum wage acted as an impediment to him getting employed. It's as simple as that. So I asked the panel, and I'm looking at you, Gawain, when we think about welfare reform of getting people back into work, is looking at the minimum wage as an impediment to that and how we can fine tune that at the bottom end for getting people who need to work the most back into work.
Paying for a system that doesn't work or is inadequate is always so much more expensive in the long run than putting some proper thought into it and paying for a system that actually works. And I was interested in what you said about the listening disorder, because when I was 12, I was diagnosed with listening disorder, and I'm sure you're all thinking, but she's at a debate festival. Because one of the things that I went through in my teenage was just lots of classes and courses and lip reading and how do I say, things to help with the compartmentalising, helping to listen, and also to forcibly join a debate club in school. And it meant that I enjoyed it then. And then I was better at listening and better at, not great, but better at presenting. And so, of course, if you're saying that students now, because I guess it's been 10 years since I last was in uni, if it's now being all like, oh, you've got a listening disorder, don't worry, you don't have to do it at all, then I would be less equipped for work because, you know, I have a chronic condition, not just a listening disorder, but I have a chronic condition, but I do also see myself as able to work. My great aunt had the same condition and she spent a lot of her life in and out of hospitals, but because of medical advances, all I do is pop some pills and I move on. People talk about getting off PIP, but I think we should more. PIP was always told to me as it was supposed to be helping with work, and you know, like it was supposed to be people would have a full-time job, but then their disability costs would be covered so that they would be on an even thing. But I think a lot of people see it as replacing work instead, which is not what it should be.
This is quite technical, and it's specifically for Gawain. I'm married to a very senior civil servant at the DWP, and he's been there for 35 years. So we, over the family dinner table, he has been grappling with professionally with this issue for 35 years. And he would say that one of the reasons the main reason it balloons is because you've got the civil service, or the DWP sets out a set of criteria for getting PIP, and then people are excluded from it. They say, no, you failed to meet the criteria, and then it goes to the courts, and time after time, most of the time, the courts overturn the DWP's decision. The courts establish case law, and every time they establish somebody wins with anxiety, then everybody will claim the anxiety gets it. Every time they get tennis elbow or panic attacks or autism or whatever, every time that case law opens the door to a whole load. And that's how gradually over time it builds up and builds up. But in order to pull it back, that takes a lot of political courage, because each time, and there's been 2 or 3 times when politicians have really made an effort to pull it back, like in Duncan Smith. And then the disability lobby comes out, and the people at the DWP are pelted with things as they come out the office, and the hard cases make the press, and they go, oh, they're horrible DWP, they're taking money away from this genuinely disabled people. And there are always a few genuinely disabled people who genuinely need that they've taken the money off. And politicians don't want that. Politicians don't want that press, so they run a mile from it. So it's, they're stuck between a rock and a hard place. And the civil servants really, really, really want to tackle this, because I hear the reform MPs bad mouth the civil service all the time, but you're not going to get anywhere with this if you don't get the civil service on side, and you don't get the DWP on side, because they are your friends and they do want to solve this.
Okay, right. One last contribution, then it's back to the panel.
Hi, I'm Philippa Gordon-Gould. I'm author of Inclusive Education at the Crossroads. So one of the things that has really concerned me, going back to some of the things that you raised, Dave, about reasonable adjustments, it seems like we're having to make reasonable adjustments left, right and centre. But what I would say is that what is really effective is what happens in Finland, and we should take a leaf out of their book and target needs very, very early on. And what we saw in the lockdown was a proliferation of needs, and it actually wasn't so much a proliferation of need as a proliferation of the exposure of needs that were already there, that were building up over time because they'd not been addressed properly. And that's what I would advocate: more assessment and implementation of support early on.
Thank you. Right, so panel, I know this is like one of those, like, what this one trick to solve your belly fat kind of question, really. But if there was one thing that you could do, because who can reform welfare is one thing, but what do you want them to do to reform welfare? So if we could just have like one clear idea of what that might be, that would be very useful. So Gawain, I'm going to put you on the spot. We're going to go this way down the panel. Sorry, here we go.
Actually, it's something outside welfare. We need to make work pay. We need to make it better to be working, and seriously better to be working than to be on benefits. So therefore, we need to increase the tax-free allowance. We need to do things like that to make work itself something that is aspirational, rather than having a condition being aspirational.
Okay, thank you.
Just some of you are frightening me. I'm expecting a Jonathan Swift's modest proposal any minute. If you don't know what that is, have a look. What would I think we've got to acknowledge that we are a very deeply unequal society, and there are people at the bottom who are really struggling, and I don't think we quite understand what's happening at the bottom. So for me, it's about looking at the bottom. Gawain's got it, really. It's about making work pay for everybody.
Okay, thank you very much. Jean-André?
So I mentioned at the beginning, I think you could make PIP conditional, especially for younger people. But to take the young man's point at the front, I think you should medical evidence should be required for every single PIP assessment. So everyone should have to provide some medical evidence. And can I just quickly talk about the point that the young woman made over here, which I think she's absolutely right about the fact that case law, basically the gateways expand because of judicial decisions. But I think the problem is that politicians, as she's mentioned, haven't actually taken robust action to change that. And so we've written really poor legislation. The Welfare Reform Act is actually poorly written. It talks about, like, can you do an activity reliably, safely, things like that, with undefined phrases which have allowed judges to expand what the phrase may well have meant at the time. And actually, part of the problem is that our legislator is very, very poor and doesn't take action to rectify things, and it's let it go for like nearly 15 years. So that would be a point I would make. And one final thing, PIP is an extra cost benefit, so it's nothing to do with employment. I just wanted to make that very clear.
Okay, thank you. Dave?
Yeah, just to lead into my one thing I'd recommend, I think the point made about autism, yeah, I recognise autism exists. I don't think neurodiversity exists. I don't think there is a neurodiverse universe in which we live at all. I think that's a myth, and it's partly responsible for some of the numbers that we're seeing, I think, because people can feel that there's an open kind of opportunity there to take. So I'm not suggesting that we shouldn't make reasonable adjustments. I think scale is the issue, and the way in which it takes over institutions, that's the problem. So in terms of my idea of what we could do, first of all, as I said before, I think reforming ourselves is the most important thing we can do. But we can cite an eligibility so that it's more fitting of the kind of society we want to see, and so that it's less permissive. I think we need to rethink what we mean by disability. Most people who are formally disabled aren't disabled. 1 in 4 people are not disabled. That's simply not true. But I think, actually, on the positive though, if we can fix these things and we can tighten the eligibility, and if we can reform ourselves, then we can also afford to be more generous and more thoughtful in the way we support those individuals that do need it.